The silence before the storm stage lights burned softly over the polished floor of the late-night studio, casting a calm golden hue across the room. The crowd was alive with laughter, claps, and the kind of eager buzz that fills the air before a popular guest walks in. The backdrop shimmered in navy blue with silver stars, mimicking a peaceful night sky, but nothing about the coming moment would feel peaceful. Hidden beneath the carefully arranged smiles and perfectly timed jokes, a storm was building, and it had a name: Keanu Reeves. Inside the green room, Keanu sat silently, dressed in a black shirt and faded jeans. His hands rested loosely on his lap, but his eyes told a different story. They were distant, hollow almost, as though he was holding an ocean of grief just behind the surface. His manager had asked him repeatedly if he was ready for this appearance. He had nodded each time, not out of excitement, but out of purpose. This wasn't just another promotion. This was something else. 5 minutes, Mr. Reeves. A young assistant whispered politely. Keanu looked up, gave a gentle nod, and stood. As he walked toward the set, the hallway seemed longer than usual. Perhaps it was the weight he carried. No one in that room truly knew what had brought him there. Not even the host, Derek Lance, whose ratings had recently been slipping, and who was known for poking where it hurt. Keanu stepped onto the set to roaring applause. The audience loved him, even when they didn't fully understand him. He was the rare kind of actor who never needed to speak loudly to be heard. His presence said more than his words ever could. He waved gently, gave a soft smile, and sat across from Derek, who leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of a man who thought he was in control. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Keanu Reeves," Derek shouted, clapping along with the crowd. The cameras rolled. The world was watching. For the first 10 minutes, things were fine. Light questions, some laughter, a few clips from Keanu's latest film. But then something shifted. Derek leaned forward, a glint in his eyes. "So, Keanu," he said, voice smooth but sharp, "you've played all kinds of tragic roles. I mean, loss seems to be your thing, right?" Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I suppose life has shaped some of that." Derek chuckled. "Yeah, speaking of life and loss, people always say you're so quiet, so mysterious. They say you carry pain, and I guess, well, it helps to have something to cry about, huh?" He paused, smiling. "Like wasn't it your daughter who—" A hush fell across the room. Derek's voice faltered for the first time. "She didn't make it, right?" The air was sucked out of the studio. A few gasps could be heard. Some audience members lowered their heads. Others looked to the stage manager, wondering if this was part of some dark joke. Keanu didn't flinch. Not right away. His eyes met Derek's. There was no anger in them, just a depth so vast and quiet. It made Derek shift in his seat. And then, slowly, Keanu leaned forward. His voice was soft, steady. "Her name was Ava." The crowd went silent. "She was born early. Too early," Keanu continued, eyes never leaving Derek. "And for 17 minutes, she existed in this world. 17 minutes of trying to breathe. 17 minutes of a heartbeat. 17 minutes of being loved more than most people are loved in a lifetime." You could hear a pin drop. "I held her hand," Keanu said, his voice cracking just once. "I held her hand until it stopped moving. And for years after, I still felt her fingers in mine." Derek's face had lost all color. His smile was gone. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Keanu took a breath. "You asked if it helps to have something to cry about. No, it doesn't help. But it teaches you. It teaches you that every laugh you give someone else might be their only light that day. It teaches you not to mock pain because pain is the one thing we all understand, even if we pretend we don't." The audience remained frozen. No applause, just awe. Keanu stood up slowly. "You have your jokes, Derek. I have my memories." He didn't wait for permission. He walked off the stage, past the stunned crew, past the blinking teleprompter, and into the hallway that had once felt long, but now felt like freedom. That night, the clip went viral. Not for the movie he came to promote. Not for any joke Derek had planned, but for one man's quiet courage to speak the name of his daughter into a world that had forgotten how to listen. And from that moment on, everything changed. Asterisk the internet breaks its silence the moment Keanu Reeves left that studio. A strange quiet took hold in the control room. Derek Lance, who had always thrived on awkward laughs and edgy moments, sat frozen in his chair. Not even the laughter sign blinking above the crowd could stir anyone to respond. The cameramen looked at each other, uncertain. The floor manager dropped her clipboard. The crowd, still seated, remained respectfully silent, as though someone had just said a prayer, and in a way, they had. Backstage, Keanu kept walking. He didn't stop to collect his things, didn't stop to check his phone. He stepped out into the cool night air, stood under the dim light near the exit, and simply closed his eyes. He didn't need noise. He didn't need an audience. All he needed was a moment. For 17 minutes, his daughter had existed in a world not ready for her. And now, 17 years later, her name had just echoed across millions of hearts. The next morning, the clip surfaced. It wasn't posted by the studio or Derek Lance's team. It came from someone in the audience, an older woman with tears in her eyes who had recorded the exchange without thinking. She titled it, "Keanu Reeves Speaks the Name of His Daughter. The World Should Listen." Within 4 hours, it had over 6 million views. Within 24 hours, it was the #1 trending video on every platform. People weren't just watching it. They were sharing it, discussing it, feeling it. Hashtags like hashtag her name was Ava, hashtag Keanu Real, and hashtag listen before you laugh began flooding social feeds. Some called it the most powerful moment in talk show history. Others said it was the first time they had seen grief treated with grace, not pity. And thousands, no, hundreds of thousands began to comment with the names of their own lost loved ones. Names that had not been spoken in years. Names that suddenly mattered again. But while the world was reeling in emotion, Derek Lance was spiraling in silence. His phone had gone from buzzing with notifications to being slammed with backlash. Sponsors were pulling out. Fans were unfollowing. In droves, even his team had gone quiet, unsure how to repair what had just shattered. In a moment meant to revive his dying career, Derek had mocked the one thing most sacred to Keanu Reeves, and instead of breaking Keanu, he had broken himself. Meanwhile, Keanu remained invisible. No interviews, no press statements, no posts. He simply disappeared from the public eye, and the silence only made his words louder. Deep in the hills of Malibu, Keanu walked barefoot through his garden. It was a quiet place, full of overgrown vines, lavender bushes, and soft dirt paths. He kept it that way, wild and free, like the thoughts he tried to tame. As the media storm raged outside, here the birds still sang, and the sky didn't care about ratings. He stopped near a small tree, one planted 17 years ago. Its branches bent slightly, and a weathered wooden sign hung near the base. It read, "Ava's Tree. 17 minutes of forever." He touched the bark gently, then knelt beside it. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something shift. Inside, something more than sorrow, something like healing. But then the gate buzzed. His assistant, Maya, called out from the porch, "Keanu, there's someone here. She says it's important." Keanu stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands, and made his way to the front gate. There, standing with trembling hands and bloodshot eyes, was a woman in her mid-30s. She wore a worn-out coat, held a crumpled envelope, and had a nervous look that suggested she had spent the entire night rehearsing her words. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I shouldn't be here. I needed to try." Keanu didn't say anything. He just gave her his full attention. "My name is Elena. My son, he died 3 years ago. Leukemia. He was 6. And after I saw your clip, her voice broke. I remembered how no one would talk about him. How even my family avoids saying his name. But you said Ava's name like it still matters. Like she's still part of your world." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "So I brought this," she added, holding up the envelope. "This is a drawing my son made. I've kept it in my wallet for 3 years, and I wanted you to have it. I don't know why. Maybe just to say thank you for reminding me that our kids mattered, even if they were here for just a moment." Keanu took the envelope, gently opened it, and stared at the crayon drawing inside. It was messy, joyful, full of colors, A little boy holding a balloon under a rainbow dot. He looked up. What was his name? Elena blinked, then smiled softly. Jacob. Keanu nodded. Thank you, Elena. Jacob sounds like someone who saw the world better than we do. She gave him a grateful look, turned, and walked away without asking for anything else. Not a photo, not an autograph, just a moment of being understood. Keanu stood there for a while, staring at the drawing. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he walked back to Ava's tree and placed it under the wooden sign. That night, for the first time in 17 years, he lit a single candle by her name and whispered, "You were never alone." On the other side of town, Derek Lance was facing a crisis meeting with his team. Every screen in the boardroom showed headlines like, "Derek Lance mocked a grieving father." Keanu's response left the nation in tears. The power of 17 minutes. Talk show moment of the decade. His producer sighed. "Derek, we can't air that episode. It's already aired." Derek replied weakly, "It's everywhere." "Then you need to fix this. Apologize. Do something." Derek looked into the mirror in the corner of the room, and for the first time in a long while, he saw not the confident host with a toothy grin but a man who had let ego blind his heart. 2 days later, Derek released a video. It wasn't filmed in a studio. It was shot on his phone, in a quiet room, with no fancy lights or edits. "I mocked a man who lost his daughter," he said, eyes red. "And in doing so, I mocked every parent who ever sat in silence, waiting for the world to care. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. People didn't expect that." And while some dismissed it as damage control, others saw something raw in Derek's face, something even he hadn't shown on TV before: humility. What followed next was even more unexpected. Keanu shared the video on his rarely used social page with only 3 words, "I forgive you." And the world, for a moment, felt a little less cruel. The ripple becomes a wave. 12 weeks had passed since the world paused to listen to Keanu Reeves speak the name of his daughter. 2 weeks since the clip lit a fire in millions of hearts. And yet, the story didn't fade. It grew. In cities around the globe, people began organizing candlelight vigils not just for Keanu's daughter Ava, but for every child, parent, sibling, or friend who had been lost and silenced by time, by shame, by society's discomfort with grief. Parks, churches, and community halls lit up with thousands of candles. Signs appeared that read things like, "Say their names, 17 minutes of forever, and we remember." And something even more powerful was happening behind the screens. An unspoken permission had been given. People who had carried silent pain for years were finally speaking. In online forums, comment sections, and live streams, strangers began sharing their own stories. Mothers talked about the babies they never got to raise. Sons talked about fathers they lost to war, to illness, to tragedy. Widows spoke their spouses' names aloud for the first time in years. Keanu's single quotes S moment of truth had become a movement of healing. Keanu, however, remained mostly out of the spotlight. He spent his days quietly volunteering at a small children's hospital in Los Angeles. He didn't announce it. He didn't post about it. He simply showed up. He read books to the kids, made them laugh with silly voices, and sometimes just sat beside them in silence, because he knew that sometimes silence is the greatest comfort. On one particular afternoon, a little girl named Layla pulled on his sleeve. "Are you really the man on TV?" she asked with a toothy grin. Keanu chuckled. "Maybe. The one who said his daughter was beautiful." His smile faded softly, replaced by something gentler. "Yes," he whispered. "That was me." Layla nodded. "My mommy says my brother is in heaven. I never met him, but I think he's like your daughter." Keanu blinked slowly, touched by the clarity of her words. "What was his name?" "Eli," she said, proud. "But no one talks about him anymore." Keanu leaned down. "Then let's say it together, Eli." "Eli," she echoed, her voice high and full of light. And just like that, Eli was remembered. Meanwhile, Derek Lance was navigating unfamiliar territory. Once hailed as a sharp-tongued king of late night, he now found himself the subject of constant debate. Some still hated him, others forgave him, but everyone was watching. He tried to carry on with his show, but it wasn't the same. Laughter came slower, The crowd seemed cautious. Sponsors whispered about rebranding or stepping away. Yet in the quiet that followed, Derek began to change. He started opening each show by reading a letter from someone who had experienced loss, not as a gimmick, but as a tribute. He called it the 17-minute segment, and though some critics called it off-brand or too heavy, something remarkable began happening. The ratings returned, not because people wanted to be entertained, but because they wanted to be moved. The moment that was meant to break him had reshaped him instead. Back in Malibu, Keanu received a letter, handwritten, sealed with gold wax. It was from a school in upstate New York. A group of students had watched his clip and been so impacted they decided to start a project called the Name Tree. In the letter, the teacher wrote, every student was asked to bring the name of someone they lost or someone their family never talks about. We wrote each name on a paper leaf and hung it on a tree outside our classroom. We now call it the listening tree. We wanted you to know. KeanuReeves' name is on the very top. His hands trembled as he held the paper leaf that had been enclosed. On it, a young child had drawn a little pink tree with a single name in red crayon, Ava. He didn't cry, but something inside him softened. Not all grief had to remain buried. That evening, Keanu walked out to his garden, to Ava's tree. He stood there for a long time, then placed the red paper leaf between the branches. He whispered, "You've grown roots far beyond here." Just then, his assistant Maya appeared. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a producer from a show called Hearts Unheard. They want to do a special episode, just you, no host, no script. You telling your story." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What's it for?" Maya read from the email. "They want to explore how grief connects us. How you reminded people that sorrow isn't weakness." Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked inside, sat at his kitchen table, and stared at the paper leaf for a while. Finally, he said, "Tell them yes, but only if it's about more than me." 3 weeks later, the special aired. It was simple, no music, no dramatic camera angles, just Keanu, sitting on a plain chair in a room filled with soft light. He spoke for 40 minutes, not as an actor, not as a celebrity, just as a man. He spoke about Ava. He spoke about how her loss broke something inside him. He spoke about how the world had tried to move on quickly, how people avoided the subject, how even friends didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. He spoke about his years of quiet pain, but he also spoke about the woman who gave him Jacob's drawing, about Layla and Eli. About the red paper leaf. And when he ended the interview, he said, "If you're carrying grief, say their name. Not for them, they already know, but for you, because your heart deserves to remember." Millions watched. And when the screen faded to black, a single message appeared: say their names. Remember them. Live with love. That night, hospitals received record donations. Support groups formed in dozens of cities. A petition to introduce a National Grief Day in schools gained over 2 million signatures. And Keanu, he returned to the hospital the next day and sat with a boy who had lost his sister. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to, because sometimes the greatest kindness is simply showing up. The name they couldn't ignore. The world had changed. What began as a cruel moment on a talk show had transformed into a global mirror, forcing people to look not just at Keanu Reeves, but at themselves, at the way they handle grief, at the way they treat others' sorrow. For the first time in a long time, silence wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be respected. But as Keanu continued to quietly help people heal, something unexpected stirred in the highest quarters of power. In Washington, D.C., a senator's aide had watched the Hearts Unheard special on a late Sunday night. Her own father had passed a year before, and she hadn't cried until Keanu spoke Ava's name. She brought the clip to her senator the next morning. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "this isn't just a celebrity moment. This is a movement, and if we don't pay attention to it, we're ignoring millions of people who are hurting in silence." The senator watched the video twice. Then, quietly, he stood up and called for a meeting. Within a week, a bipartisan group of lawmakers began drafting a new initiative, the National Remembrance Act. It proposed a national day of reflection, not for a specific group or war or tragedy, but a day to say names, to honor the invisible grief so many carry in silence. Keanu wasn't told. Not yet. They wanted to surprise him. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Keanu was visiting a public school that had started a name tree garden. Inspired by the story in upstate New York, he walked through rows of trees, each one filled with colorful leaves, each leaf carrying a single name. No dates, no causes, just names. It wasn't about how someone died. It was about how they lived, even for a moment. A teacher guided him to one tree in particular. "This one's special," she whispered. "Every leaf here belongs to a student's memory, people they've lost, but we're too afraid to talk about." One small boy, maybe 10 years old, stepped forward. He had curly hair and wide, nervous eyes. He held out a leaf that read Uncle Josh in shaky handwriting. "He died last year," the boy said. "Everyone says I'm too young to understand, but I do. He used to tell me stories. He was my best friend." Keanu knelt beside him. "You understand more than they know," he said. "And by saying his name, you've made sure he lives again." The boy smiled for the first time, and in that quiet garden, Keanu realized something. This wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about dignity, about the right to remember, about giving sorrow a home. Derek Lance, too, was going through his own evolution. He had kept his show going, but it no longer looked like the one he started with. The jokes were lighter, the segments deeper. He had learned how to ask better questions, the kind that left guests feeling heard, not exposed. He started inviting everyday people onto the stage, grieving parents, veterans, cancer survivors, refugees. He gave them a seat and simply listened, and for once, his ratings weren't climbing because of shock value. They were climbing because people were tired of pretending they were fine. One evening, Derek stood on his stage and said, "We used to make jokes to hide from pain. Now, maybe we laugh and cry because we're brave enough to feel both." He paused. "Thank you, Keanu Reeves, for reminding us of that." One afternoon, Keanu received a personal letter. It came in a thick cream envelope, stamped with a gold seal. He opened it slowly. Inside, a formal invitation from the United States Senate. They were hosting a ceremony in 2 weeks to introduce the National Remembrance Act. They wanted him to be the keynote speaker. Maya was the first to react. "They want you to speak in Congress, Keanu? That's massive." Keanu stared at the letter in silence. Then he looked out the window toward Ava's tree. "I never imagined this," he whispered. "What do you want to do?" Maya asked. He looked at her, then smiled gently. "If I can speak for her, I'll speak for all of them." The day of the ceremony arrived. Washington was gray and wet, but the mood inside the Congressional Hall was reverent. Lawmakers, journalists, educators, and grieving families filled the seats. Floral arrangements lined the stage. A massive banner read, "National Remembrance Act, in honor of all the names we carry." When Keanu stepped to the podium, the room fell utterly still. He wore a simple black suit, no tie. His hair brushed back, no makeup, no shine, just Keanu. He placed his notes gently on the lectern, then looked up. "I was asked to speak because I once said my daughter's name on a talk show," he began quietly. "But the truth is I've been saying her name every day for 17 years, just not always out loud." The room was silent. "Grief is not loud," he continued. "It doesn't scream. It doesn't perform. It whispers, and most of the time, it whispers when no one else is listening." He paused. "We walk among people every day who carry entire universes of pain, and we ask them to smile, to move on, to get over it. But what if we simply allowed them to remember?" He told them about Ava, about the 17 minutes, about the wait, and about the peace that came when he said her name aloud, not just for himself, but for everyone who never got to say goodbye. "This act is not about me," he said. "It's about all of us. It's about a country brave enough to say we see you, we hear you, we remember." When he stepped down, no one applauded right away. Many were crying. Some were simply holding their loved ones' hands. And then, slowly, the room rose in silence. A standing ovation without sound, the deepest kind of respect. That night, candles were lit across the country. News stations aired the full speech uninterrupted. And Somewhere in a small town in Ohio, a little girl whispered the name of her twin brother who had died in infancy. She whispered it to the stars, and she smiled, because now she knew someone out there was listening. When grief became hope as the sun rose over the capital the next morning. Something rare had taken hold of the nation, a quiet unity. For once, no one was shouting over each other, no one was debating politics or chasing scandal. Instead, people across all walks of life were doing something simple but powerful. They were remembering. Schools across America began preparing for the newly approved National Remembrance Day. Teachers gently introduced the concept of loss in age-appropriate ways. Art classes made memory trees. English classes wrote letters to people no longer present. In one high school, a student who had never spoken a word about his mother's death suddenly stood up and said, her name was Danielle. She liked hummingbirds. The room fell silent, and for the first time in years, he felt like he had been heard. But even as the world embraced this new chapter of compassion, Keanu Reeves remained grounded. The attention didn't change him, it humbled him. He wasn't looking to be a symbol. He only wanted to be real, and so he returned to what he knew best: quiet acts of kindness. At the children's hospital, the nurses noticed how much calmer the kids became when Keanu sat by their beds. Sometimes he told stories, sometimes he helped them draw, but most of the time, he just sat with them, offering a silence that felt safe. One nurse, Melissa, watched him carefully. She had worked in pediatric oncology for 12 years, had seen countless celebrities visit, some meaning well, others seeking attention. But Keanu was different. He grieves like we do, she whispered one night to her co-worker. That's why the kids trust him. One evening, a boy named Isaac, thin from chemotherapy and no longer speaking much, tugged on Keanu's sleeve. He handed him a folded piece of paper. Keanu opened it and saw a drawing of a man holding hands with a small girl under a sky full of stars. Written in childlike handwriting were four words, "She's still with you." Keanu looked at Isaac, eyes soft. "Thank you. That's the truest thing anyone said to me in a long time." In New York City, Derek Lance stood backstage at the United Hearts Summit, a global conference that had, incredibly, invited him to speak. The same man who once mocked a grieving father was now seen as someone who had grown. And though he still felt guilt, he no longer let it paralyze him. Instead, he used it. On stage, Derek didn't try to charm anyone. He didn't make jokes. He spoke with vulnerability. "I made a mistake," he told the crowd. "But pain has a way of becoming purpose if you let it humble you." He shared how the 17 minutes segment changed not just his show, but his life. He talked about the letters he still received from viewers, many of them simply saying, "Thank you for saying my daughter's name." By the time he finished, the crowd wasn't cheering, they were wiping their eyes. And somewhere backstage, Keanu, who had quietly attended without being announced, gave a single nod of quiet respect. Afterward, he approached Derek. They stood in the corner, away from the cameras. "Thank you for not running from what happened," Keanu said softly. Derek looked down. "I still think about that day. How stupid I was. We've all said things we regret," Keanu replied. "The difference is what we do afterward." Then, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and handed Derek a small wooden carving of a tree, with one leaf painted gold. "I carry one too," Keanu said. "We all have names we carry, just don't forget why you carry them." Derek held the carving like it was made of glass. And in that moment, the man who once made the cruelest joke was now entrusted with something sacred. Months passed. National Remembrance Day arrived, and what unfolded was unlike anything the country had seen before. Church bells rang at 8 a.m. in every state. Trains paused for 1 minute. School assemblies stood together and spoke names aloud. On the front steps of the Lincoln Memorial, a choir of children sang a new song written just for the occasion. It had no lyrics about loss or sadness. Instead, it celebrated memory, love, and the invisible threads that still connect us to those we've lost. Keanu watched the broadcast from his home. He didn't want to be at the center of it. Instead, he sat by Ava's tree, the same tree that had quietly grown through seasons of grief. Maya arrived with a small package. "This just came for you." No return address. Inside was a book. A scrapbook. It contained thousands of leaves, each one handmade, each one with a name. Some were famous, most were not. Tucked into the cover was a note, for the man who reminded us to speak. Because you spoke first, we now speak to. Tears welled up in Keanu's eyes, and without a word, he added one more leaf. This one read, for all the names still waiting to be spoken. That night, a final tribute aired on national television. It wasn't planned by any network. It had been organized by families, schools, and community centers across the country. The screen showed one thing, a single tree under a night sky, its branches full of glowing leaves. A narrator said quietly, every name matters, every moment matters, and sometimes it only takes 17 minutes to change the world. Millions of people sat in their living rooms, holding candles, holding photos, holding memories. They whispered names, they cried freely. And they healed together. A world that remembers the early morning air in Malibu carried a light breeze, one that stirred the leaves of Ava's tree gently as Keanu Reeves sat beneath it, barefoot, calm. It had been exactly 1 year since that night on Derek Lance's talk show. 1 year since a single question had reopened an old wound and, unexpectedly, healed 1,000 others. The world had changed in those 12 months, not because of a celebrity's grief, but because people had finally given themselves permission to feel, to remember, to speak. Keanu sipped his tea slowly, watching the sunlight stretch across the ground. Near the base of the tree, dozens of tiny paper leaves had been tied with thread. Some were from children, some from strangers, some sent from across the globe. Each carried a name, a story, a piece of someone's soul. A knock on the gate interrupted his stillness. Maya poked her head through. There's someone here, she said, from the un. They say it's about an invitation. Keanu raised an eyebrow but nodded gently. Within minutes, a woman in a navy blue suit stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. Mr. Reeves, she said warmly, on behalf of the United Nations, we're inviting you to be the closing speaker at the International Remembrance Conference in Geneva. It's the first of its kind. They'd like your voice to represent everyone who's ever been left behind by silence. Keanu blinked slowly, thoughtful. He had never asked for this journey, never sought attention or podiums. But perhaps that's why people trusted him, because he spoke only when it mattered. He gave her a quiet nod. I'll go. 2 weeks later, the world watched as a plane landed in Switzerland under gray skies. Reporters filled the airport, cameras flashed, and news anchors described the moment as if royalty had arrived. But Keanu, dressed in a simple black coat and carrying a modest leather bag, didn't seem like a guest of honor. He looked more like a man walking slowly through memories. In Geneva, the International Remembrance Conference gathered people from over 90 countries. The flags waved outside the massive marble hall. Inside, seats were filled with activists, families, teachers, scientists, and artists, all drawn together by one shared truth. They had lost someone, and they hadn't been allowed to talk about it. The room fell silent as Keanu walked on stage. He didn't carry notes this time, just a small wooden carving of a tree in his hand. He looked out over the sea of faces, many crying already, and began, I once believed my daughter's story ended after 17 minutes. But it didn't. He paused. Because of her, strangers have spoken names they've held inside for decades. Children have honored siblings they never met. People who never thought they were allowed to grieve now know they're not alone. He held up the wooden tree. We carry them, in our memories, in our decisions, in our quiet moments. His voice cracked slightly. We carry them in how we treat one another. Then he placed the tree gently on the podium and said, Today isn't about the past. It's about the promise we make going forward to never treat grief as weakness, to never mock someone's silence, to never laugh at sorrow, because every name matters. The audience stood, not in applause, but in reverent silence. In the months that followed, the effects of that promise echoed worldwide. In Japan, a tradition began where families tie ribbons in cherry blossom trees each spring to honor their loved ones. In Brazil, remembrance circles formed in poor neighborhoods where grief had long been ignored. In rural Pakistan, teachers introduced story time where children could draw and share about relatives they missed. In Germany, Trains began announcing 1 minute of stillness every Remembrance Day. And in the United States, the 17 minutes tradition became an annual event. Workplaces, schools, and hospitals all paused not to mourn, but to honor. Keanu never tried to lead these movements. He simply kept showing up, one hospital visit at a time, one handwritten note at a time. He listened, and the world listened. Back. 1 year and 5 months after the original talk show moment, Derek Lance stepped away from his desk for good. He left the industry on his own terms, giving his final segment not to a celebrity, but to a teenage girl named Faith who had lost her brother to gun violence. She spoke his name, Jordan, and the entire studio stood for him. As the show faded to black, Derek said only one thing: "Keanu, thank you for saving my soul." And what of Keanu? He returned to his garden in Malibu, planted 3 new trees each, with leaves tied by visitors, many of whom he never met. Sometimes he would sit and read every name aloud. Sometimes he would sit in silence. One afternoon, Maya asked him quietly, "How do you feel now?" He smiled softly, like she's everywhere. He whispered, "Not just in me, but in them." On the second annual Remembrance Day, a new monument was unveiled in Washington. Not a statue, not a plaque. Just a tree. Made of stone and bronze, with metal leaves that shimmered in the wind. Etched into the trunk was a single line: "For every name that ever mattered, and for the man who reminded us to speak them." Beneath it, just one word: Ava. And the world remembered. Asterisk.